In this video, we're going to be going over page 2A of the MDE LCRR service line inventory spreadsheet. And page 2A is titled Overall / Entire Service Line from Water Main to Building and Building Information. So before I go into the detail of this page, I'm going to zoom out a little bit to kind of show you what this page looks like as a whole. So you might not be able to see the text, but again, I'm just going to show kind of a layout of this page, which is a little bit different than page 1 that you might already seen from the other video or when you were looking at page 1 on your inventory spreadsheet. So for page 2A, you're going to see columns, multiple columns with different colors, and we'll go into what those colors mean again. And we are going to, I'm going to scroll to the right, and you're going to see that these are the columns that water system may have to provide data for. And some of them you'll see that it's optional, and we'll go over all of that. But so here is the end of this page 2A. So I'm going to go back again here. So you're going to see, we have a section for the column headers related to, the column itself with the description and the field name. And then you're going to see all these rows here underneath it. So service lines, information related service line, and for each service line, this is where you will be populating the data for. So for each of the row, right, so I'm going to zoom in now a little bit more. So each of these rows will represent the information for a service line, right? So if you have 5 service lines in your water system, then you need to provide the data for 5 rows, right? So if you have 10, you provide information for, see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? For 10 rows, and so on and so forth. So now let's go into a little bit more detail related to the information that we're asking on this page. So as you may already can tell from the title, right, on this page, you're going to provide information related to the entire service line and also building information. But you'll see that for the building information, some of the information will be optional, and your water system will not have or will not be required to provide that information. However, for some of the some of the data, it might be useful for water system to provide. But we'll go into that in a little bit. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so that you can see the text a little bit larger. And so you'll see row 5 is the one with different colors, and we'll go through each of these colors again. And right at this point, right, I'm going to scroll left to right, and you're going to see some that are highlighted in lighter blue, some that are highlighted in darker blue, some in green. And if you scroll a little bit more, you'll see the salmon color columns. And if you scroll all the way here, you'll see some purple, right? So the color coding for column header or field names, you can find more information on that on the detail of each of the color on the introduction page. So again, we're going to navigate to an introduction page briefly to kind of revisit a little bit more detailed information related to each of these color. So again, the introduction page can be clicked at the bottom, toward the bottom of the spreadsheet. And the color-coded information is toward the bottom of the introduction page. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors. And right, so we're seeing all of these colors on page 2A. So I'm not going to go over this table again here, but as we go through the columns, right, I'm going to kind of note for each of these, again, what they mean. But I don't want to go into that yet. But again, keep in mind that this is where the color coding comes into play, and will help you navigate the spreadsheet, as well as figure out whether your water system need to provide information in certain columns. And then on row 6 we have field description. So field name is just the name that MDE has come up with for each of the columns. And for field description, this is a little bit more detail of what MDE is asking water system to provide. Right, so we'll go to what we'll do is we'll go through each of the columns in more detail, and for this page to see what kind of information water system will need to provide on the inventory spreadsheet. And then on row 7, we have an example row of data. So this is the row of data that MDE has provided an example uh, data under each of these columns. So you can see as an example what that looks like. And we have that for all of the columns here. So as we go through each of these columns, we'll see what are some of the possible uh, answers, right, or data that you will see under each of these columns. And the same thing is true for pages 2B, 3, and 4 as well. Now I kind of skip over row 3 and 4, so let's go and look at row 4 right now. So row 4, there will be some columns that will have a little bit more detailed information related to a column below it. So in this case, what you are seeing right now, is saying that this data in column C here is carried over to pages 2B, 3, and 4. And we have several columns that are like that. So again, this row 4, if you see something uh, here, it's just providing additional information, right? So that which columns, when you enter the data, is being carried over to other pages. And we'll go into that later when we go to pages 2B, 3, and 4. And then on row 3, you'll see a text that is in red that reads, hover over cell below to see note. So some of these field description in row 6, you're going to see in the corner of the cell. Let me try to zoom in a little bit more to see if it can get a bigger picture of that. Is you will see the red triangle in the corner, right? Top right corner of the field description. Whenever you see that, it indicates that if you hover over that cell, there's going to be a pop-up that provides a little bit more information related to that column. So for example, we hover over this cell here, and you can see there's a pop-up related to public water system assign unique identification number for each service line. And now when you move your cursor somewhere else, that pop-up disappeared. So let's go to the next one that we see the triangle for, right? And then when we hover over it, you'll see another pop-up with a different comment related to, in this example here, location information / description. So we put this note here on row 3 to kind of also help you as you navigate through all of these columns, to kind of let you know, hey, there's a little bit more information if you hover over the cell in row 6, right? So that is row 3. So I'm going to zoom out now so that we can see the rows that we need to populate data for. So one thing that you may notice, right, if you open the spreadsheet and you can't see row 8, 9, and 10 or 11, where the information that, where the location where you actually have to start populating the information, what you could do, like for example, if you open the spreadsheet and it looks something like this, right? Like you can't see anything except for row 7. Then what you can do is remember to zoom out a little bit so that it creates a little bit more viewing area for your spreadsheet so that you can now, access the rows that you actually need to populate the data for, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And again, if you run into some issues that we don't cover in this video, be sure to contact MDE and we'll help you troubleshoot any issues you encounter. So let's now go through each of these columns. So the first column that you'll see starts on column B. And this one, you see that under the field name is highlighted in light blue. So anything, again, in light blue is required unless stated otherwise, right? So if you see something highlighted in blue like this, and you see something like if applicable, or likely that you don't have optional, but just in case, right? If you do see something that indicate you can skip it, then you would not have to provide anything under that column. However, most of the time when you see something in light blue, that information is likely required. So let's look at this one. This one is a date of most recent update of data related to service line on this page. So you'll see this column actually on other pages as well, on pages 2B, 3, and 4. And this column is used to, again, let MDE know whether the information under a particular row, or or a service line, right? Because again, for each row is for each service line, is to let MDE know whether information on this page, so we're on page 2A right now, right? On this page, whether or not anything in that particular row has changed from the previous submission, right? So for example, if we are submitting this for the first time, right? And again, I'm gonna put in the date that I'm submitting this document as the date that, is the most recent update, right? Because this is the first version we have. So I'm gonna put in this date. And you provide some information on this row, right? For the initial submission. And then you submit it to MDE. And then a year later, you're submitting the inventory update, right? And so, and you find yourself making changes on this page, right? Under row 8. Then if that happens, you need to be sure to also update this column with the date that you make that change. So let's say I made the change exactly a year later. So what I'm doing here is I will put in, right, the year 2025 instead of 2024. And what we will do on our end, so on MDE's end, when we look at this page, right, 2A, right, of your inventory update submission, right, if we see a date, right, that is different than the one that you put in for the initial submission, let's say, right, that you submitted in 2024. Now, let's say we're in the year 2025, you just submitted the inventory update. What we're going to look for this column to see, oh, okay, you've indicated there's some changes made, right, to the spreadsheet. So I should see in this column, let's say on this page, if you do make an update on this page, right, a date that is different, right, and that's from the previous submission, and that's how we will determine whether or not there has been a change that's made on this particular page. Now, if you didn't make any changes on this page at all, then the date that you input should be exactly the same as the previous submission, right? So if we don't see any changes in the date in this column between the current submission and the previous submission, and then we can say, okay, there's no changes made for this service line on this page. Now, if there are changes made on different page, on another page, right, then it would be the date that you need to change will be on the other page. For example, if you make change on page 3, right? And I'm just going to skip ahead for page 3 just for a little bit to get a sneak peek. You'll see that we also have, right, this column that asks for the most recent update of data related to service line on this page. So if you make changes on page 3, then the date will need to also be changed on page 3, right? So again, you'll see this data is not carried over to other pages because it could be different from, for page 2A, right, compared to page 2B, depending on whether or not the change has been made for a particular submission. So that's what this column means, right? So then the next column over is a public water system, or PWS, assigned unique identification number for each service line from water main to structure. So this column is asking water system to provide a unique identification number for a service line, for each of the service line that you have in your water system. So let's say if you have 5 service lines, right? All those 5 lines should have its own unique identification number, so that if we say, let's say we want to know more about service line number 1, right? Then whatever that name you assign it to, then we could refer to that and you know exactly which service line we're referring to. So this identification number should be created by the water system. So it can be anything that that your water system wants to use. You need to make sure that it is unique. Combinations of letters and numbers are great. So again, if you have any questions specifically, if a certain way of creating the identification number would be acceptable, feel free to reach out to MDE regarding that. So in the example of data, we just put in example 1, right? So as long as that's unique from another service line that your water system have, then that would be okay. So the next sets of columns, so the next 4 columns that you'll see here, the color coding is a bit different now. It's going to be a darker shade of blue. And if you recall, darker shade of blue here means sensitive information that, that water system should provide to MDE that will never be shared with the public unless indicated otherwise as optional, right? And you can see here, actually, all these 4 columns, we have the word optional in all of them. So in the end, we actually don't require water system to provide this information, information under these 4 columns to MDE. And we actually asked that, if you do populate the data, and we'll ask why, you would even bother populating the data under these 4 columns. If you do populate the data, be sure that you delete the content and then save the file as under a different name before submitting to MDE. So for instance, right, let's say you decide to populate the data here, as we see in the example row of data. And I'm just gonna right now copy paste. And again, whenever I copy paste something, I'm always gonna copy paste as a text. So I'm just gonna show you what that kind of looks like. So I'm gonna copy, right? And then I'm going to select the cell I want to paste. I'm gonna right click. This is just one way of pasting as a text. And I'm gonna look for this clipboard with 1, 2, 3. When you hover over it, you should see the word values. So again, copying and pasting as a text is important, and we have an instruction for that under Appendix F. So if you want to, the instruction on how to do that, be sure to take a look at Appendix F. So anyway, so I'm just gonna, populate these just as an example. But you know what? Let me show you another feature that I haven't showed you yet, which I mentioned in the other videos, is that we have, automatic highlighting as well as hatching to help water system navigate through the spreadsheet, and it it helps kind of visual aid to let water system know, oh, do I need to provide data in certain columns, or can I leave the blank? And at this point, right, we haven't really seen any highlighting or hatching that happens. So, and that's because I haven't provided the information that actually triggers that yet. And that is this column C. So, as a default, right, water system will need to provide a unique identification number, even though it's not highlighted here. It's just because, it's intentional that it's not highlighted here because we don't know how many service line your water system have. So, we can make a pre like highlighting for under this column, because if you only have one, then you don't have to fill out all the rows. If we highlight it in advance for all the rows, it might create certain confusion. So we intentionally didn't highlight this one, but you'll see as soon as I put in an ID, for example, I'm just going to do let's say ABC-01. Right, as soon as I do that, you're gonna see right away the cell is highlighted in yellow now, and then we see it toward the other end, to the right, that's starting to highlight. So because because water system or us is indicating that we do have a service line under row 8, it triggers other columns, that now that you indicated we have a service line, now you have to provide other information related to that service line as well. So I'm just going to scroll a bit to the right just to show you that when you input that unique ID, it start to highlight certain cells in yellow already, so that just so that exactly where to go next, basically, right? So, and you can see that these cells here under this darker blue column is not highlighted because, right, it is optional, but we have it here because um, when water system populates information on the spreadsheet, and you can see that there's a lot of columns, if you have 100 service lines, it's going to be, we kind of need some way to keep track of all those service lines and making sure that we're putting the data um, under the correct service lines, right? So part of sensitive information that we have included on the spreadsheet here could help you, you know, uh, keep track of where that service line is, in addition to the unique ID number. So a lot of times you'll see, that the information related to location information description, it would be like a street address, right? So for example, here, an example row, we're saying that there's a service line with ID of example 1 that's located at 123 Main Street. So, our example could be something like, located on, 456, Main Street, right? At a different location. So then you could, in addition to just having an identification number, um, the address could also help you keep track, especially when you have a lot of service lines that you have to populate the data for. And the next 3 columns under the darker blue colored columns that are sensitive information, we have a place, basically these are placed for water system to input, to use on their end, right? The information that could be helpful that they want to keep as they're generating these service line inventory, so that it will help water system um, document and keep track of their service lines, as well as the information that only the water system needs to know, right? Not MDE. So this would include latitude and longitude, right here. And then if you do provide longitude and latitude for your own, again, for your own use, a lot of times it's good to kind of know what that longitude and latitude is in reference to. What is a reference point for that particular location, right? So an example that we give here is, is a latitude and longitude of the corporation stop valve, for example. And So if water system chooses to use these 4 columns and populate the data for, right, for their own use, then what we do ask water system to do is, you should save a copy of the file of the spreadsheet that you have these data populated for all of your service lines. And then make sure you save a copy of that. And then after that, when you have that copy, right, for your own use to keep, then you create another copy where you remove the content under these 4 columns before submitting to MDE. So that way, basically, in the end, you will have 2 different copy of the files. One with these columns populated, that's for you to keep, and another one is without any of these columns populated to submit to MDE. So I'm going to go through an example of how you would do that. So before I do that, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some rows a little bit tinier, just so that you can see a little bit more data where we are going to populate the data here. So just going to make this a little bit smaller. And maybe for now the field name as well. Okay, so now you can see a little bit more, right? And I'm just gonna populate some data here, like maybe 2 or 3 of them, just to as an example. So it doesn't have to be anything in particular. So I'm just gonna put some random numbers here, and I'm just gonna keep these guys the same. Again, this is for illustration purposes. And I'm just gonna copy all the dates here as well. And we're gonna do like ABC02 and then ABC03. All right, as you can see, as I start populating these ones are highlighted too. So now let's say this is a copy that you want to keep for yourself, right? Let's assume that you should do this clear content or delete cell contents at the end, right before you submit the data to the spreadsheet to MDE, right? Because we want what you have done to complete first so that you have a complete version for your own use, right? And then so let's assume that we have already done that. So let's say we've already have everything filled out for all the pages. And now we're going to create a copy for MDE to be submitted to MDE. So first, right, I'm going to save this one as my copy. So this is the one that I'm going to be working on until the end, right? My copy. And now we have reached the end, right? I'm going to now, before I start deleting anything, because I like to just create another copy right now before I start deleting stuff in case I did it accidentally. So I'm going to save this one. For example, you can name it as for MDE, right? So that's what I'm going to do for MDE, so that I know this one is I'm going to submit to MDE. So under this copy for MDE, I'm going to select the cells under these 4 columns that I want to delete the data or remove the data. So right now I have 3 service lines, so I'm going to select these 12 cells, right? After you make a selection, you're going to right click, and then you're going to select clear content. After you do that, the data in the cells that you selected is gone, right? And now you can go ahead and save the file. And now, so I have the file that I have, appended in the file name for MDE, so that I know that this is a version that does not have these that have data under these 4 columns. So that's how you would save or create another file specifically to submit to MDE. And again, I would wait until you complete everything, right? So that you know that the only difference between the 2 version, the my copy version and the 4MDE version, is the fact that the 4MDE version, the data populated under these 4 columns is not there, right? Now, if your water system choose to not utilize these 4 columns at all, then you only need to have 1 copy, right? For your own use as well as for MDE submission. But again, we would encourage that you utilize these 4 columns if that's going to be helpful for your use in the future. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this file, and then we're going to go to my copy so that we can have the data that we already populated there. So I'm going to close this file. I'm going to go back to my copy version. So here. So one thing that you'll see over and over again when you close the file and open the file is that you're going to see the security warning. So this is a good example to show you that all you have to do is make sure that you click enable content, right? Every time you see this message before you keep working on your inventory spreadsheet again. So these are the 4 columns, and we have just showed you how to delete the content, right? And so remember to do that if you populate the data under these 4 columns. So now we're gonna scroll to the right to see what other columns are. So now after these 4 dark colored blue columns, you're gonna see another one with the lighter blue column. So, and in addition to that, you're gonna see that this, right, is highlighted in yellow. So this is a good indication that your water system should not be skipping, right, any cells that have yellow highlighting. So this column is asking for structure / building / connection type. So if you recall from another video for page 1, right, water system info, we mentioned about connection type, right, in the table on page 1. So I'm going to go back to page 1 quickly. But if you want more detail on the entire page 1, be sure to check out the video that we have for page 1. So I'm going to go to page 1 quickly. I'm going to scroll to the location that we have talked about in that other video related to connection type. So here, right, this is where the information is being related. So on page 1 here, the information that you put on page 2A here, right, will show up on page 1. So and we'll put something here as an example, and then you'll see in real time what that looks like, right? But before we put anything in here, let's take a look at what are the options available under this structure / building / connection type column. So you click on the cell that is highlighting in yellow, right? Anything that any cell that has a drop-down option, again, you'll see this little square icon with a triangle that's pointing downward. So make sure you click on that. And then you'll see all the drop-down options, and you might have to scroll right up and down to see all of them. Now, and for the purpose of this video, is a little bit too small for the viewer to see all the drop-down options. So what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to Appendix H just to take a look at all of the options, right, in a little bit bigger text. And again, Appendix H is always a good place for water system to take a look to see what are the all the available options that MDE has created for columns that have drop down. So again, before we go to Appendix H, we're gonna try to help ourselves locate the column on Appendix H by basically looking at what column is this, the column that you're interested in looking at the drop-down options, which column is it? So on this page, right, page 2A, we are right now looking at column H. So we're going to remember page 2A, column H. And now we're going to navigate to Appendix H. So again, we can use this lower left-hand button to scroll through the pages until you see Appendix H here. All right, when you click on that, you're going to see, again, we're going to look at column row 3. We're going to look for the one that says page 2A, right? Column H. So we're going to scroll. Oh, here we go. Page 2A, column H. And it is the column structure / building / connection type. So here we can scroll through to see what are the available options for this column. So first we see residential, right? There's a bunch of residential. One is single family, and the next one is multifamily, and we also have school dormitory. We also have residential mobile structures, such as mobile home, trailers, RVs, or boats, right? So within the residential selection, you have multiple ones. So water system should choose the one that fits your situation for that particular service line, that best represent the connection for that particular service line, right? So if you have a service line that's connected to a single family home, then this option should be selected on page 2A, right? Similarly, if you have a service line that's connected to a school dormitory, right, then you make sure to select residential school dormitory for that particular service line. So similarly, we also have a bunch of different non-residential type structures, right? So again, I'm not going to read out each one, but you can see, what some of these are. And we also have other kind of combination of residential building and in-home childcare as well. And then there's a bunch more non-residential. Oh, and then we have mix, right? Residential and non-residential. Again, we also have empty and occupied buildings, because again, the requirements for the service line inventory is that water system need to include all service lines, uh, even if it's connected to an empty or unoccupied buildings. And last options that we have is other. So if you look through this list of drop-down options and you cannot find any one of them that best represent your situation, then you should choose other. And then we have a column that is for comments, and I'll show you where that is, and that's where you would put in the information related to the connection type that you want, that the fact that you cannot find any of the options here. So just provide a little bit more detail on what that connection type is for that service line, right? So let's go back. So I'm going to scroll back up right here right now for now, and then I'm going to go back, navigate back to page 2A. Okay, and now we're going to make some selection. So again, I'm going to click on this button to the right of the cell that you select that you want to populate the data. And let's assume that the first one is connected to the single family, right? And then let's do something a little bit different for the second service line. So let's say the second one is connected to a commercial building. And then let's say the last one, the third example here, we're going to do an empty and occupied buildings, right? So let's say we have different ranges of connection type for these service lines. So as soon as you make these selections, right, the table in page 1 is already pulling the data and summarizing so far how many service lines or connection types that you have in your water system. So let's navigate back to page 1 briefly to see. And now you can see here, instead of all zeros, right, we now see you have a one number of service line connected to a residential type building. And then you have one for non-residential type building. You have nothing for mixed residential because that's not what we selected. And one for empty and occupied building, right? And then the total connections that we have right now on the spreadsheet is 3, which is matching with what we have done so far, right? We have 3 lines. Now, if this is all the lines that you have, then you can just keep going, right? But you may have more, but at this point, you populating 3. So again, this is useful to keep track of how many service line that you have, at least at this point. Oops, my apologies. Page 2A, you will fill up until column H. But you will see that on page 1. So I'm going to go back to page 1 quickly. If you scroll down a little bit more, right, we talk about this in another video, that this section of page 1 also summarizes the number of service line in each of the service line material classification. And you can see here it's still 0, right, because we have not provide any data related to the service line itself yet in terms of the material of that service, of the service lines that the water system have. So even though we have the 3 total connections that we have put in the data so far, we don't have any data here yet. So that's why right now, right, is still 0. So when we complete the entire spreadsheet, right, you'll see these numbers at the end. The total number of service line will match with the total number of connections, right? And that's what you're kind of aiming for. So that means you have the total number of service lines, and then you have complete everything up until the end, right? So at this point, we can tell that we have not completed anything, everything for any of the 3 service lines yet, but at the end we should. Okay, so we're gonna go back to 2A right now, and then let's go to the next column. So again, the next column is the light blue color, and it's also highlighted in yellow. So we have to populate the data. And in this case, we are asking for water system to provide identifier type that corresponds to the location/information description in column D. So what this for what this column is asking for is that instead of giving us the sensitive information, right, like a street address or a lot number or anything that we don't really need, what we want is the how you identify the location, right? So the identifier type for the location information or description that you provide in this column. So let's take a look at what some of those identifier types are. So again, I'm going to go back to Appendix H so that we can see all of the drop-down options. So I'm going to go to Appendix H, and then we have the identifier type, right? 2A column I, kind of skip, looking for that column number letter, but I know that it's right next to the connection type. So for this column, for identifier type, we have street address, option for street address, for lot block, intersection, landmark. We also have 911 address, property account identifier, map parcel, or other. So again, if you don't have, if the list that we have provided here does not best represent the location description or information, then feel free to use other and then provide more detail in comments. So again, right, the selection that you will be making here will depend on the information that you generated for on page 2A under this column. So if you decide to use street address here, we ask that you provide street address, right, as the identifier type. So again, even though we're not going to get this information here, we will still at least get some type of a relationship to how how the service line is being defined in terms of the location or information within your water system. So for all of these, right, example here, we would say all street address. So that's identifier type. The next column over is zip code. So for this one, it's pretty clear and it's green. So it's not required, but it's highly recommended. And we don't make it as a required column. And that's why, this yellow, these cells are not highlighted in yellow. So we can skip that. The next column is what we refer to as service line scenario. So the question asks which scenario, see Appendix A, best represents this service line from water main to structure, and it's a drop down, right? So for this one, we reference Appendix A. So we are going to go to Appendix A and look into this service line scenario a little bit more. But just to show you again, right, this is a drop-down option. So for the cells that you want to populate data for, make sure that you have that cell selected, click on the drop-down, and then you can see that there are 4 options available. And now let's navigate to Appendix A so that we can look at what does scenario mean for the purpose of the service line inventory. So to access Appendix A, right, we can access it right through the spreadsheet by navigating to the tab that says Appendix A through G, right? And you can find that down here. So when I click in Appendix A through G, you'll see again the table with the link to Appendix A through G. So right now we're going to go to Appendix A, right? So I'm going to click here, and there should be a pop-up that I'm going to move to the main screen. Just hold on for a second here. Oops. Okay. So, oh, my apologies. Here we go. The tab disappeared. So we're going to go back to Appendix A, and it should pop up. Here we go. So Appendix A, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and you're going to see just from the picture here, there's scenario A, B, C, and D. So there are 4 possible scenarios that we hope that would best, at least represent your service line configuration. So let's go through each of these scenario a little bit more. So scenario A is here, and this I'm just gonna go through like the legend here. So this represent, where like the water main, right? And the blue line here is going to be service lines, and then this would be the structure. So for scenario A, what this scenario represent is that the entire length of the service line is owned by the same entity, which could be system, customer, or shared ownership. So if you have service line that goes from water main to the structure, right, and the water system owns the whole line, then you would have that service line scenario would be scenario A. Okay. Or if the entire line is owned by the customer, right, from the water main to the building, then you would have that for that service line scenario A. And the same thing if you have the service line that is shared by both system and customer for the entire line, then you would select scenario A, right? Scenario B is like a sub is related to scenario A in the sense that the entire line, right, from the water main to the structure is owned by the same entity, so either system, customer, or shared ownership. However, there is a branching out of the service line as depicted here in this figure. So we have, the service line and the beginning from the water main that, the waters travel through the same pipe. And then at some point, it branches out into one structure and another structure. So in this example, branches off into 2 structure, right? So in this case, you essentially have 2 service lines, right? One is the light blue colored service line, and the other one is a darker blue color service line. And both of these would be scenario B, right? But in totality, there should be a total of 2 service lines. So let's say if you have this situation, then on the spreadsheet, you should have 1 row of data for this light blue service line, and then another row of data for this darker blue service line, right? But the scenario for these 2 is still scenario B because the entire line, right, is owned by the same entity. And the fact that the first part, the first portion, right, of the service line is shared between these two, right? So the water again travels through the same pipe up to a certain point, and then it branches into two separate lines or more. It could be multiple, right? So that's scenario B. Now, scenario C is similar to scenario A, where there's no branching in between the water main and the structure. However, the ownership is now different between first portion and second portion. So for scenario C, you can see here that even though it's the line that is continuous through from water main through the structure, there's a different in ownership, right? So the first portion is owned by one entity, and the second portion is owned by another entity. The most common situation, right, for community water systems is would be scenario C, where the first portion is owned by the system and the second portion is owned by customer, right? Now it is not to say that community water system does not have other does not have service line with other scenarios, but the most common scenarios that community water system have would be scenario C. Now scenario D is similar scenario C, where you have the difference in ownership, right? The first portion is owned by for example system, and the second portion is owned by customer. However, there's a branching that happening similar to scenario B, right? So anything that has branching is either going to be scenario B or D, right? And depending on ownership, right? If there's two separate or different ownership for each of these portion, then it should be scenario D. If same entity owns, both portions, then it would be scenario B. Now let's go back to scenario D. So again, scenario D, right? You would have the branching, and some of the terminology that we have heard that would be, something like a double meter situation. So if you have situation like that, then it would be scenario D. Again, in this depiction here, you would have two service lines, right? One again lighter blue, and the other one is darker blue, and where the first portion of the service line is being shared by these two service lines. So these are the scenario. And Appendix A, if you scroll down a little bit more, right, anything that I've explained verbally just now would be explained as well in the Appendix A. So feel free to look at Appendix A in more detail, because it actually contains a lot more information than what I've said here, as well as the example, a possible example for each of the scenarios. Okay, and as well as giving you an example of the layout as well. And so that's Appendix A. And before I go away from Appendix A, what I want to also mention is the concept of segment, because that concept is also being depicted here in Appendix A. And you'll see in a little bit that we also have a question or a couple of questions or a couple of columns that ask water system whether or not they're aware, that a service line contains more than one segment, right? And what does that mean? So earlier you hear me mention about portion, right? So what we meant when we said portions, I'm going to scroll back up just a little bit right now. When you see, first, second, and first, second here for each of the scenario, these are the portion. So for scenario A, there's only first portion because the entire line, there's no break in the branching, or there's no difference in the ownership. So the way that we go about scenario A is that scenario A is just one portion all the way through, right, from water main to building. Now, if we look at scenario C, well, B, C, and D, all of these are, there's no, there's more than one portion at this point. Because, for example, for scenario C, right, because there's a difference between the ownership. So we break that wherever that ownership split, right, into portions. So again, going by the most common situation, you would have like the first portion being owned by system and second portion being owned by customer. So when we talk about first portion, what does that mean? It means for scenario it means that the portion is owned by the water system, right? And the second portion is the portion is the portion is owned by the customer, right? And so similarly for scenario B, even though there's no difference in the ownership, right? Because there's a break in the service line itself, right? Then the service line is technically now made up of multiple portions, right? So so the first portion is the ones that that is being shared by the service lines, right? The water is traveling through the same pipe, and then at one point it's going to split, so the water now is traveling through different pipes, right? So you can think about the fact that you could have for these for scenario B and D, the first portion is going to be made by the same pipe, right? It's the same pipe for these two service line. So the material for the first portion for this light blue service line is going to be the same, right? Material, the same essentially type as the first portion of the darker blue service line. But when it breaks into or branches into uh, two different service lines for the second portion here, then the material might not be the same, right? And that would be considered the second portion of the service line. So with that in mind, right, when we talk about concept of segment, right? So if you look at this picture alone, right, this is in the example scenario C, right, where you can see that this line, this red dotted line, is depicting the location where service line ownership split. So, and you can see through the legend here, right? So let's say the meters where the ownership split. So the first portion, we're going to say that is the portion that the water system owned, and then the second portion is going to be the portion that customer owns, right? So for scenario C, you have the first portion and the second portion. Now, within the first portion for this example, there's another break, right, within the portion itself into multiple segment. So you see that this curve stop valve is located in the middle here, and it essentially split the first portion into multiple segment, which you know uh, can can which the material of the first portion itself can be different, right? From this segment closer to the water main could be made of one pipe material, and between the curve stop valve and the meter could be made of another pipe material. So we kind of want to kind of have this on the water system's mind when water system work through the service line inventory in terms of concept of segment. That if water system is aware that there's that their service line have multiple segment, then that should be recorded in the inventory spreadsheet as well. And you should keep that in mind throughout when you're trying to find out, okay, well, what is the material of the first portion, let's say in this example, right? Then you would need to investigate, um, segment number 1 as well as segment number 2 in relation to what that pipe material would be, because it can be different, right? It can be the same, but it can also be made of different material. So that's just something that we want to bring to water system attention, as it could be a possibility that there would be some service lines that have multiple segment. And when we talk about segment, is within a portion. So in this example, right, it's depicting that the first portion of the service line has multiple segment, while the second portion of the service line is just, one continuous segment here. So again, this information is um, provided in Appendix A. So be sure to review Appendix A. If you want to know more, information related to service line scenarios, right here, as well as a concept of segment. And if your water system has any questions related to any of scenarios or multiple segment concept, be sure to reach out to MDE. So right now we're going to go back to the spreadsheet and back to page 2A, right? So now we are going to make some selection related to service line scenarios. So for the purpose of, the example here, we're just going to select, for the first one, scenario C. And I'm also going to make some selection for scenario A, just to show you the difference between, when you make a selection of scenario A versus scenario C, or other scenario, because again, scenario A only has one portion, right? And so you'll see that within this description itself, that page 4 is not needed, right? Because later, when you go through all of these tabs that are brown colors, and again, the brown color tabs are the tabs that, or the pages that water system will need to provide information for. For the lines, right, that you select for scenario A, you'll see that page 4, information on page 4 will not be needed. So if you have a situation where all of your service line is scenario A, then for the entire inventory spreadsheet, then you will not have to do anything on page 4. However, if you have a mixture, right, as what we have here, we have one scenario C, one scenario A, then you will still need to go to page 4. But on row 9, for this ABC02 service line, you will not have to do, or you will not have to populate data for that row on page 4, right? So let's create another example that we're gonna do scenario D, right? Just to make something different. And because scenario D, you have a branching. So I'm going to create another example to kind of go with that, right? And let's say we have another service line and we have a double meter situation. So we're gonna do a house next to this one. So we're gonna do 847, right? We have two houses right next to each other. And this one's empty occupied building, but why not have, so let's say another one is next to it is also empty and unoccupied, right? And we're going to select, again, this is just an example so you can see how some of the columns are being filled based on your selection, right, of the scenarios. So again, I'm going to squeeze, some of the columns together so that you can see a little bit more. And I'm not quite sure why we are seeing this happening, but it's just the graphics. So I apologize for that. Okay, so let's look at each row, right? Just go down each row. So we're gonna focus on row 8 first. So we have scenario C. The next question that's asked right away is how many segments that public water system is aware of make up the first portion of the service line. So again, going back to the concept of segment, right? We're basically asking is, for the first portion of the service line, how many segments that your water system is aware of that makes up that portion. So if you have, if you're not aware that there's multiple segments that makes up the first portion of the service line, then you should select one, right? So basically here we said select one unless public water system is aware that there's more than one segment that makes up that first portion. So we, again, you have two options. Either you select one or more than one, right? So in this case, we're going to say we're not aware of any, uh, that we have multiple segment. Then all you have to do is one, right? And the same thing for other scenario as well. So we're just going to say all of them is one. Again, this is depending on your water system, right? But for an example, we're just going to say we're not aware of any multiple segment situation going on in any of our service lines. The next question that we're asking is ownership of first portion of service lines, right? So for scenario C, let's say we're going to say that is owned by system for first portion. For scenario A, let's say the system owns the entire line as well. And for scenario D, again, we're going to all say system. Again, this is just an example, right? And the next question, the next column over is going to be related to portion 2. And you're going to see that these cells for row 9 is being hatched out, right? And that's because, going back a little bit, scenario A, we only have one portion. So we are not going to ask you to provide anything related to the second portion because it does not exist. And that's why automatically it will highlight anything that is not relevant or applicable based on the selection that you based on the information that your water system provides. Right. So in this case, we say that row 9 is only one portion. So these are going to be hashed out and we can just skip those. So for row 8 is scenario C, right? If you recall here, scenario C. So again, we're going to say we're not aware. So the question is similar to the other column. It's asking how many segments that the water system is aware of that makes up the second portion of the service line. And we're going to say we're not aware of multiple segment situation. And the next column over is going to be related to ownership of the second portion of service line, right? So we're going to say that these are owned by customer, right? And now we have filled out the spreadsheet up until column O, right? So the next column is going to be related to, is applicable only for scenario B or D, right? Then you can see that for the situation, for the service line that I've selected scenario A or C, right? So for row 8 and row 9, we have scenario C or an A, right? You're going to see that because it's not applicable, it's going to hash out. So anything that's hashed, you can just skip or don't even look at them, right? But now we do have some cells that are highlighted in yellow, so we can't skip that. So we're going to have to care about this particular column. So let's take a look at what that column is asking. So it reads, if scenario B or D is selected, create/provide a key or ID in cell highlighted in yellow below. So these cells, right? To link the first portion of the service line that feeds into all downstream second portion that branch from it. All service line from water main to building that are fed by the same first portion should have the same key/ID. Right? So what does this mean? So in order to help kind of visualize what this means, we're going to go back to Appendix A. Right? So again, you can go back to the ones that you already opened, or I'm just going to open another Appendix A again. So I'm going to the tab that said Appendix A through G. I'm going to click Appendix A. It's going to open Appendix A again. So to visualize what that means is we're going to look at scenario B and scenario D. So they're kind of similar. So either one you're looking at is okay. But what we're going to focus on is the fact that these two service lines, right, that share the first portion, right? And the line that feeds the downstream second portion is this first portion here. So what we want for water system to do is to create a key or an ID that would link these two service lines together in order to indicate that these two service lines share the first portion, right? Or have the same first portion of the service line, right? So let's say that we have 4 houses total, right? And basically we have 2 sets of the double meter. So let's say up top here we have one set of the 2 houses that have this situation, and we're going to say the different 2 houses, right, that have scenario D situation. So for the one up top here, right, we're going to have the link key that is the same between this one in scenario B. Now, when you come upon another set of a double meter situation, right, you would have a different ID, right, from this first set that is for the other set. So when I do an example, it will become more clear. But between the set that has the first portion being shared, right, should have the same ID, but it should not be the same as the other set, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to look at that ID and we're going to see, oh, okay, these service lines have the same first portion. And then we're going to look at another set and we can say, oh, okay, this one is a different set that has the first portion of the service line. So let's go through an example to kind of illustrate what that would look like. So I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet and I'm going to go back to page 2A. So right now we only have one set of the double meter, right? Or one set of scenario D. So I'm going to create another set of that just to kind of illustrate the key, what that key ID should look like. So I'm going to create 2 more service lines. So we're going to name this service line 5, or ABC 5, and then ABC 6. Okay, and it's gonna locate in a different street altogether. So we're gonna do like First Street, let's say 4 344 First Street, and then we're gonna have the other one next to it for 346 First Street, right? And these 2 houses, let's say it's gonna be single family. I'm gonna go through these columns a bit quicker because we've already done an example of that of these other columns already. And then now I'm gonna also choose scenario D as well, right, for these ABC 5 and ABC 6 service line. And then the same thing, I'm going to say that I'm not aware of any multi-segment for first portion, and the first portion is owned by system. For the second portion, again, I'm not aware of any multiple segment situation, and the second portion is owned by customer, right? So now we have scenario D, where we have the branching that happens, right, for 2 sets of houses, buildings. And you can see that under this column here that's asking for the link or key ID is highlighted in yellow, right? So we have to provide that information. And before I provide that information, I'm going to take a sneak peek a little bit to the right of that column. You can see there's some error messages that happens already, right? In this column that we haven't really talked about, but you're going to see that in certain situation there are columns to help you kind of uh, help you see if you have missed something or if there's an error somewhere that you need to kind of take a look at to make sure that you provide the information for. So for example, in this one, if you just glance to the right of this column, is basically telling you, hey, you're missing the ID or the key that links the service line together in this cell, so it cannot be left blank. So there's some clues. If you see error in red text somewhere, it's an indication that there's something is missing or something's not quite right. So be sure to look through your spreadsheet to see if you have any error in red text somewhere. And if you look at it and you try to fix it and it's not happening, the error still comes up, feel free to reach out to MDE and we can help you troubleshoot the errors. So let's see how an example of the key and ID. So right now, right, we know that the houses on the main street, these two houses, share the first portion. So I'm gonna come up with something random, but that I'm going to use to illustrate how water system can come up with a link key ID that would be unique to a set of the service line and then unique also to another set. So for this one, for these two houses, I'm just going to say link 01, right? So anything with link 01 is going to indicate that it has the first portion is being shared amongst all of the service line that have link 01. So for the houses on the main street 845 and 847, right, I'm going to have link 01. So when on MDE's end, when we see this, we're going to say, okay, there's two service lines that are sharing the same first portion, which you named it as link 01, right? So now for this second set, I'm going to do link 02, right? And then again, link 02. So this is telling me that there's another set of, the branching situation that you have within your service line inventory. And link 02 is to indicate that the houses, basically service line ABC05 and ABC06 is sharing the first portion, right? But it's not sharing the first portion with ABC03 or ABC04 because it has a different key/ID under this column. So that's how you would handle whenever you have the branching situation or scenario B or D. So this is how you would indicate to MDE, which service line shared the same first portion. So, and that is how we would handle or create the key and ID for these scenario B and D. So as soon as I put something, or a key /ID under this column, the error message is gone, right, automatically. So let's take a look at what these salmon color columns are. So again, if you recall, the salmon color columns indicate the columns that are automatically generated by MDE. So again, and you also have another clue here as well under field description that is auto-generated, right? So these two columns are auto-generated. So you can skip for the purpose of filling out the spreadsheet. You don't even have to worry about these two columns at all, right? But if you are curious or want to know a little bit more of what these two columns are, I'm going to go over this a little bit. So in order for MDE to identify a service line that maybe we want to follow up with water system on, we are going to we have these two columns basically to create a unique identification number that basically you can see that is made up of several information that water system provides. So if you look at this first one as an example for ABC01, right? So for ABC01 service lines, you can see that it's system owned, and there's the first portion. For the first portion, right, there's the number of segment is 1. So by looking at just the name that MDE generated automatically here alone, you can tell that, okay, for this particular service line, right, you're looking at the first portion of the service line. This is going to be the name that's attached to the first portion of the service line for ABC01, right? And the information about the number of segment is also there, right? And then for the second portion of the service line is a column next to that. And in the name itself, right, you can see that this second portion is owned by the customer, right, for this particular service line. So similarly, when you have for row 9, you recall that is scenario A, which means that there's only one portion from water main to building or structure. That's why only the first portion, the name for the first portion is, or the ID for the first portion is being created, not for the second portion, because the second portion does not exist. And then for other situation, when you have a shared first portion, right, then certain information will appear here. So you can see that part of the name here, we include link 01, right? So from the name, we can tell that this is related to the service line that shared the first portion that have the key or ID of link 01. And then for the other one, you can see link 02. So again, this is just some extra information the water system does not need to worry about. But in the situation where we need to pinpoint a certain service line or portion of the service line that we would like to maybe discuss with the water system about, then we can use these two columns, which is the MDE assigned unique identification number for first portion and the second portion in our communication. So let's keep going with the next set of columns. And you're going to see the next set of columns is blue color column and a light blue. And you can see that these cells are highlighted in yellow, so we cannot skip. And these two columns are asking for the server-side activity status for first portion and second portion, right? So again, the requirement of the server-side inventory is that water system need to include all service lines in the water system. Doesn't matter if it's connected to buildings that is currently occupied or not occupied, and also regardless of the activity status as well. So whether or not it's currently in use or it's not currently in use right now, but maybe used in the future. So this is the place where water system will have ability to indicate, whether or not it is currently active, currently inactive, or maybe. So right. So the options that you can choose is one of the three is either currently active, currently inactive, or you don't know. Again, we put the don't know there because you might not have a chance to figure out that situation yet, and we don't want to hold water system back from filling out the spreadsheet. So we have that options available. But so in this example, we're going to say that all of them are currently active. However, except for maybe the ones that are going to the unoccupied buildings, right? So again, depending on the situation that you guys have, it should match up, right? So let's say for this one, we're going to say currently active. And for unoccupied buildings, which is 3 and 4, we're going to say currently inactive here. And you can see there's some error status right next to it, right? So before I go any further, just to, oops, again, my apologies with the graphics here. You can use, there are some places that have error flag columns, and for this one we have one for activity status. So if there's anything that's an issue, you will see error message, but for the ones that doesn't have any issues, then it would just be blank. So here, right, I haven't filled out a bunch of these are blank, so I can't skip that, otherwise we'll have errors. So we need to make sure that we fill all these up. And if we fill this up, right, properly, this one will disappear. So again, we're gonna populate all of these so that we don't have error messages, right? So now that means we have complete up until this point, everything that we need to do up until this point. Now, let me show you a little bit of another situation where you could have an error message. So in this case, right, we have first portion, second portion, activity status. There are a combination of activity status for first portion and second portion that will not make sense. For example, if you have the first portion as inactive, right, and you select for the second portion as active, you're going to say, well, think about the water flow. If the first portion, there's no water flowing, then the second portion should also not have any water flowing, right? So that this combination would not make sense. And that's why you see an error that says, error cannot have currently inactive first portion with currently active second portion. Again, this is just an example to show you that, look out for error messages, because it will help you, give you some clues and hints as well as to why the selection that you have chosen is not, doesn't make sense. So now we don't see any error messages, so that's good. So now we can scroll to the next column, and the next column here is a light blue column. And again, right, the light blue column means you need to provide something. However, in this situation, is overall service line comments, and it said if applicable. So anything that is combination of blue and if applicable, and there's no highlighting here, that means you will not need to provide anything in this column, and then you can skip it. However, if you have comments related to a particular service line that you want MDE to know, be sure to use this column to let us know that comment, right? Now, let me show you, though, in the situation where this column would light up in yellow. So if you recall, some of the columns, we have the options for the drop down as other, right? So let's take a look at one of those that have other. So I'm going to go back to, for example, the structure/building/connection type. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you see the options for other, right? And we say, please provide details and comments. So whenever you select other and we have please provide details and comments, when you come upon the comments column, you're going to see, right? Again, so this is another visual cues that if I see yellow highlighting, that means I'm supposed to put something here. And for this situation, it's because we have selected for under the structure building connection type as other, right? So so when that situation happens, you just need to make sure that you input, whatever information that you're supposed to provide. So again, that's an example. So we're going to make that selection back to residential. So at this point, right, we have finished up all the way to column V. And if you scroll from this point on, you're going to see all the columns here on row 5 as being highlighted in purple, except for, again, coming up to the comments, right, toward the end, and we'll go to, again, same situation. If it's applicable, you need to provide. And then we also have the ones that the text appears to be cut off. Not quite sure why, but it's supposed to say entire SL classification. But anyways, this column is salmon color column. So again, anything with this color, salmon color columns is auto-generated by MDE, right? And then you're going to see an error message already here. And that's because in order for the spreadsheet to generate the service line material classification on page 2A, we need the data. We need water system to provide the required data first on pages 3 and or 4, right? So when you see the error on this page, don't worry about it too much unless you have already complete everything, right? Up to page 4 and you still see the error, then we should worry about, how to resolve these error messages. But at this point, we are only on page 2A. So when you see this error, it makes sense because we have not provided any data on pages 3 and 4 yet. So let's scroll back to the start of the purple color columns. So for the purple color column, if you recall, is to indicate that these columns are optional, right? But information might be useful for future LCR requirements. So, and it's also indicated in row 4 here. But if you again want a reminder of what these colors means, we can always go back to page 1. Sorry, my apologies. On introduction page, not page 1, introduction page. So again, let me go back to the introduction page and here And again, this is where all the color-coded columns. So for purple, right, optional. Uh, information might be useful for future lead and copper rule requirements. So it's the same note that we have put here. So when you come upon the purple color column, you do not have to, again, it's optional, so you can skip everything, leave everything blank. And again, these are not highlighted in yellow. So we can just scroll through and just look for the light blue columns, right? And then we already saw this one. So for this one, you might ask yourself, well, is color blue, so do we need to worry about it? And again, right, because anything related to the comments is if applicable. So we can't, assume in advance whether or not water system have any comments related to building for this particular column. So if you do have some comments that you want us to know, right, then you should provide that on the spreadsheet, even though it's not highlighted in yellow. But it is highlighted in blue because in a situation where it is required, right, it will be in combination of the cells here being highlighted in yellow. So at this point, if you want to not fill anything in for any of these purple color columns, then you can move on to page 2B, right? But let's kind of go through these purple columns right now so that I can explain to you what we're asking here. So let's do that. So at the start of the purple column, it's going to be related to the building that the service line is connected to, right? So for row 8, we're talking about service line ABC01 and the building that is connected to. So when it's asking, we're going to go column by column, right? Is there any part of entry or POE treatment present in the building? When we talk about building, we're talking about the building that this ABC01 service line is connected to, right? So depend on the building itself, we have either yes, right? You can answer yes, no, or don't know, right? If you want to populate these data, you should choose from the available drop-down options, right? So the next column is the question is there any point of use or POU treatment present in any of the faucet in the building? Again, we have the option of yes, no, or don't know. All right. The next column is asking, does the building's interior or premise plumbing currently contain lead pipes? And again, the options are yes, no, or don't know. So if you do know that it currently contains lead pipe, then feel free to populate yes. And again, these purple color column is optional, right? So you do not have to fill anything in here, but it could be useful for future lead and copper requirements. Now, let's say in the future you want to populate these, you can submit the initial inventory without any of these populated, right? And then let's say the next submission, you have more time, you don't want to populate all of these for all your service lines, then you can, in the inventory updates, you can provide data to these columns and then be sure to update the dates, right, on these in this column here. So to indicate that, oh, you have made some updates or changes to the service line inventory update submission. All right, so the next column over is, does the building's interior plumbing currently contain copper pipes with lead solder or flux? And again, the options are yes, no, or don't know. So most of these are going to be yes, no, or don't know. Next is year building constructed. So this is a drop-down option, right? So we provide you with all possible years that you can have. Anything that's after 2024, we just collectively said 2024 or after. Or you can also put don't know. And you can see, depending on your selection, right, it's going to trigger another cell, either hatch, right, or yellow. So if you actually provide the year the building was constructed, then the next column over is asking for you to provide the sources of information for the year building constructed. So an example answer could be as that, right? And again, because you provided information here, this one is now highlighted in yellow, that if you provide information here, we would like you to indicate where you get that information from, right? So we're going to say is that. And the next column over is asking for the year of original plumbing material installed in the building. So we understand that you could have a year that's building constructed to be 1 year, and the year when the original plumbing was installed as a different year altogether. So that's why we kind of separate the two. For certain cases, it could be the same, right? For another cases, it could be different. So, and the next question is, was this location previously used for sample site plan under LCR? When we say location, it's probably structure and building. So again, yes, no, or don't know, right? And depending on your answer, you're going to see the next column over is being hashed or not, or nothing, right? So if you say yes, right, then you can provide information related to the tier category under original lead and copper rule for community water system. So it's not highlighted in yellow, which means that you can also skip. You can like just answer this column, and leave this one blank, right? Or just skip both of these columns altogether. But what I want to point out also is that you can see that there's another column right next to this one. I'm going to just make this a little bit smaller. Oh, again, so that you can see both at the same time. And again, I think it's going to go funky again, but that's okay, as long as we can see now together. So for the column on the left here is applicable only for community water system. And the one on the right is applicable only for non-transient, non-community water system. So you'll see that right away, the one for non-transient, non-community water system is being hashed out, right? And you might wonder, well, why is this one not hashed and why is this one hashed? And actually that's because behind the scene is looking for the selection that the water system makes on page 1. So if you recall, we're going to go back to page 1 quickly. There's a location that asks water system to indicate the type, right, of your water system. So because we happen to choose community water system, right, when we go to page 2A, because this column is applicable to only non-transient and community water system, and the water system, the type that we select is community, that's why this one is hashed out, because it's not applicable, right? So let's say if our water system is actually non-transient, non-community water system, right? I'm going to make that change here. When you go back to 2A, you're going to see this now, this column that's applicable only for community water system is now hashed out, right? And now this one's unhashed. So again, this is a feature that we have built in, right, to kind of hash certain cell out so that you can just, don't even have to worry about it, right? So again, just to go back, just to remind water system, this is still optional, right? But I'm just showing you in the situation where you want to provide information to MDE, look for the visual clues or cues that, if it's hashed, then you don't have to worry about it. Don't even look at the column, what it says. But when it's blank or highlighted in yellow, make sure that, if it's not highlighted in yellow, you do not have to populate it. But if you want to, you can, right? But if it's highlighted in yellow, you need to make sure it's not blank. So, I'm going to leave this blank. And then after that, we are done, right? We don't, let's say I don't want to make any comments under this building related comments column. Then the last column again is the auto-generated column that after you have complete all the pages that you are required to input the data, you will have a entire service line material classification generated, or shown up here as opposed to error message, right? So for example, under row 7, where we have example row of data, we have non-lead service line for this particular service line that we're seeing here, because we have for that particular row, right, example row, we have already complete all the pages and input all the required data for this particular service line already. And that's why we don't see an error message. So when we complete everything, right, we're going to come back to this page 2A and take a look at it, and we'll see that, the error message would be gone, and it would be replaced with one of the 4 service line material classifications. So it would be either lead service line, galvanized requiring replacement service lines, lead status unknown service line, or non-lead service lines. And now that we have reached the last column on page 2A, right, we have now complete the page 2A for overall entire service line from water main to building and building information.